Hello, I want to welcome you all to The Power of Our Story. On Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we will have a weekly storytelling evening where each one of our 29 authors of our book, Wounds to Wisdom Healing Through Veteran and First Responder Narratives, will read their story from the book. Our collaborative effort is a labor of love from all of those protectors who may be suffering in silence. All are welcome. So tonight I want to introduce you to retired Navy SEAL Michael Peyton, who will be sharing his story tonight. So a little bit about Mike. He was born a Wyoming native and raised in Tucson, Arizona's Sonoran Desert. Mike Peyton enlisted in the United States Navy with the high achievement of becoming a Navy SEAL. After 21 years of service that included 4 deployments to Afghanistan and 2 to Iraq, he retired with a strong willingness to share his acumen and aptitude with those who would like to further develop and refine their own purpose. Even in childhood, Mike understood the SEAL teams were purposeful in recruiting exclusively from a circle of men who had the fortitude and will to fulfill the physical and mental demand, which is why he fought so valiantly to cope with and overcome adversity through his life, including a battle with cancer. Mike's newfound passion is to mentor and lead both individuals and teams triumphantly through life's minefield, exploring both positive and negative paradigms and always doing so through an empathetic lens. So, Mike, I want to welcome you tonight. We're excited to hear your story.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was a great introduction. Um, I guess I'll just jump right in, and I got the book obviously, so I'm thumbing through it as we speak, and here we go. So, chapter 18, addiction, the antithetical gift. So, wearing the proverbial scarlet letter, despite never having been convicted of a crime and having a spotless record my entire life, had a profound impact on me. How can people automatically presume an individual is guilty of a crime without evidence, examination of witnesses, and diligently, if not objectively, utilizing their discernment on both sides of the narrative? I realize this isn't the optimal mindset or the best series of questions to ask. It wasn't until I completely surrendered to my maker that my mental and spiritual apertures truly opened. Amidst the trials, I'm thriving because greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. While sitting idly in my jail cell, I asked myself a couple of critical questions. Why is this happening to me? And what mistakes did I make along the way that cultivated my current predicament? These two questions opened Pandora's box for self enlightenment and the dawn of another transformational phase of my life. A 20-year career in the SEAL teams allowed me to see and experience various regions of the world, from war torn and uncertain to first world societies outside of the United States. Furthermore, the teams trained and equipped me to operate in less than ideal circumstances where the odds could shift at the drop of a hat. The teams have a brilliant way of preparing operators to protect Western constructs, and I'm forever grateful to have served with some of the most heroic and patriotic individuals this country has to offer. Toward the end of my career, I went through a contentious divorce, a battle the teams did not prepare me for. In the process, I filed for bankruptcy, foreclosed on my house, agreed to a lopsided custody arrangement, and picked up the bottle after 5 years of abstinence. What a terrible choice. I wrestled with alcohol my entire teen and adult life. It was the mistress that kept plunging and securing its hooks at me, despite my attempts of eradication. With certainty, I can say that at least 95% of my personal and professional quandaries correlate back to this persistent and invasive tyrant. A couple more years with this chaotic imposter at the helm brought me to a life altering decision point. Either go to rehab and evict this monster or lose the remainder of my accumulated scraps and die. In my despair, I petitioned the Lord in conviction, excuse me, that if he delivered me from this wicked oppressor, I would earnestly work for him. 3 days later, I was detoxing at the Naval Hospital in San Diego. Without question, this was a providential act, with my brother advocating the entire way and moving mountains to make it happen. Upon completion of rehab, I was adamant about helping other operators wrestling with this problem. After retiring from the Navy, I founded a nonprofit organization focused on addiction recovery. The mission was faith oriented with a holistic approach to combat this Goliath. The foundation's modalities encompass healing of the entire person, body, mind, and spirit. Programs are tailored to individual needs. The foundation's board, partners, and service providers were building the plane as it was flying, which was an amazing feat. One fundamental tenet in most recovery programs is to not make any major life altering decisions within the first year of sobriety. I carried the burden of four, two of my own volition. Because I was still active duty and in a recovery program, the Navy cut orders back to Virginia, where I spent majority of my career, right up to the remainder of it. In hindsight, this was a good call because I was familiar with the area, had a support network of friends and family, and it allowed me a twilight tour prior to retiring. 4 months into this transition and still thinking with a drunk brain, I ended a long distance relationship with an amazing human being of a woman and immediately jumped headfirst into a new romantic relationship. My childhood trauma and the fear of being alone massively outweighed all of the blatant warning signs my new partner revealed about herself. It appeared I had attracted yet another woman within the cluster B category of personality disorders. I reasoned and justified to myself that it would be different this time because I have the resources to help her and me, whereas I didn't in my prior relationships with this particular type of personality. I just knew that we would get to the root as to why we were consistently having up to 10 plus hours of nonsensical circular arguments and sleepless nights, her hair trigger reactions, the gaslighting and splitting, our traumas, my addiction and avoidant attachment style, and her extreme fear of abandonment. As a couple, we were a fool's errand indeed. 2.5 years of this toxic relationship was plenty, and it was time to end it permanently. I had ended it multiple times before, but this time the suicide threats and the stalking wouldn't persuade me to come back. I had recently obtained custody of my son, and I could not bring him into an unstable environment like this. Enough was enough. Being diagnosed with cancer didn't hold a candle to the terror this relationship caused me. I just graduated from Harvard's flagship executive education program, professional leadership development, was recovering from cancer surgery, and was fully determined to take the foundation to the next level or two. 10 days later, the first criminal charge of malicious wounding came for me. So the frigid, shifting gears a little bit, the frigid holding cell smelled like urine. Clearly, it had made a permanent home in the pores of the aging reinforced concrete. At a snail-like pace, the minutes turned into hours, and I began to question whether or not this was going to be a process and release for me. I looked around at the others who were gracing their presence in this dystopic nightmare. Never having experienced this before, I imagined they were the typical crew of misfits. Three street hooligans, a couple of drunks, and a shirtless 300-pound man laying belly up on the floor, biting his hand until he drew blood, and occasionally wiping his feces on the wall. At last, the corrections officer summoned me to appear in front of the magistrate. My hands and feet were shackled for escort. With indifference, the magistrate explained that she could not release me due to the egregious nature of the charge and that I must stay in jail to await a bond hearing. The truths that surfaced from Stanford's prison experiment began to surface during the intake process. I was guilty in their eyes, despite not actually being convicted of a crime. Mugshot, fingerprints, DNA swab, and the cavity strip search is standard and necessary protocol to reside in this house of horror. After that, to me, that's hilarious. After this subhuman experience, and unbeknownst to me, I was marching towards a pod that held the hardened inmates. These inmates are either charged and or convicted of serious crimes, and most of them had a fathom-long criminal record. I was as green as they came in this system. One of the only prison movies I've ever watched was Shawshank Redemption. I wrote a paper in I wrote a paper in college on recidivism and drug crimes. This was the extent of my criminal justice knowledge. With God's grace, I retained an impeccable defense attorney, and a week later had my first bond hearing. Standing shackled in front of the judge, with my brother and sister in the courtroom pews, my attorney and the prosecutor went at it for a good 10 minutes. The judge listened intently to both arguments. Then she said, set the bond for then she set the bond for 5,000 with no stipulations. Immediately the prosecutor objected and appealed the decision. As charges kept trickling in, I ended up having four more bond hearings because the prosecution continued to appeal the various judges' approved decisions. After the fifth, there were no more appeals, and I finished my jail stint after 31 days. Despite living in perdition, God used me as a beacon of light because with Bible studies for those who wanted to participate, including prayer groups. My cellie gave his life to Christ. Glory to God. Through these trials by fire and blessed with a 4 year sober mind, I've retained many invaluable lessons and will share four that have continual resonance. Firstly, there are two personifications an individual can choose to emulate either the Machiavellian archetype filled with hate, discontent, malice, and vengeance, or the Christ like archetype encompassing virtue, forgiveness, love, and humility. Secondly, never quit despite the opposition. Remember, it's okay to take a pause in order to recalibrate, refocus, and realign, but don't quit doing the right thing, regardless of temporal circumstances, like a tarnished reputation or getting stripped of material goods. Persevere to the end because this is part of the self actualization, refinement, and purification process, which is significantly more valuable. Thirdly, do not make any major life altering decisions within the first year of sobriety. Trust me on this one. And lastly, don't make decisions with a fear driven mindset. This is a setup for failure at all levels and in every capacity. Instead, counter this determined intruder with knowledge, understanding, and faith. That's all I have. Thank you for listening. So,
Oh, Mike, thank you so much for sharing. If you don't mind, maybe I could ask you just a couple of questions while we're still recording. Just because I have a feeling maybe people watching this may have the same questions. Would you be open? I can always take it out afterward. I can edit it out. And then
absolutely.
for everybody else too, then we'll go ahead and just pause it. But first off, I just want to thank you, Mike, for sharing. I think so much of your story is so common, but not talked about. And that's why I think your story is so powerful. It's because you are speaking for many people who are not sharing their story. So thank you for that. I know, a lot of us have been friends with you for a while and have really come to appreciate your journey and see kind of, who you are and how you're handling all this. So I am curious.
Okay.
Um, there are times that you laughed, and I'm just so curious what you were thinking when you were laughing.
Um, well, for starters, because it's so obnoxious. And it's clearly, in my opinion, it's clearly a spiritual attack. It's a spiritual attack, but it's but what the enemy is utilizing is our infrastructure, so our criminal justice infrastructure, and from a spiritual perspective, if you think about different principalities, or let's say the hierarchy of the spiritual world. Like if you're a threat to that system, that evil empire, that evil system, you're going to be persecuted. You're going to be attacked. So for all the Christians out there, like if you're being attacked, you're probably doing the job you're supposed to be doing. Um, but I laugh because it's just so it's so obvious to me and of what is happening and what's transpiring at this point. And I look back in hindsight and because I'm walking through a memory right now, or I'm speaking of a memory right now, and because I forgot about the big old dude that was like wiping his uh, fecal matter on the wall, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, this is not a place for me. Like, this is not my home, and so I think whenever I get in a really bad position, I end up laughing because it's a way to cope maybe. And because I remember in Buds going through SEAL training, uh, when you go through some really terrible situations, all you can do is laugh, and because there's nothing, if you take it in the negative direction, like you're going to not only bring yourself down, but you're going to bring everybody else down around you. So you laugh instead. And so that's why, for me, that's why I choose laughing
Yeah.
or prefer it rather.
What was that last word you said?
I'd say prefer it rather than
Oh,
the alternative.
yeah. Yeah. And and you talk about the dark principalities. If you shared like kind of in a practical way of how that looked and how that showed up, um, what was the hardship? What was the thing that you were fighting?
Well, let's see. So clearly, anybody that's in the addiction arena knows that the substance is a coping mechanism for something else. So you're usually blocking it, or and you get addicted to it. So now you're using it as to make sure your physiological uh, chemical dependency is balanced, or which it's never balanced under a substance like that. But I was battling at the time though. It was childhood trauma primarily. Well, it was a combination of things. It was I've definitely hit the perfect storm because I was isolated when this was happening, and then the perfect storm ensued because I was isolated. I had time to think about various things, and one of them was childhood nonsense, and then a little bit of combat stuff, and then marriage or divorce, losing custody of my son because I was active duty, so I could never. The Virginia courts would not give me custody because I was still operational at the time or deployable, um, which I get it. That does make sense, but it's a terrible, terrible nightmare for the for the parent, um, for the parent that loses that custody. It's a nightmare. And then not to mention the bankruptcy. So economically, or financially, I was unstable and trying to come out of that. So it was a perfect storm of events and then things just started bubbling in isolation. And next thing you know, I'm hitting a fifth a night, like, or throughout the day, just drinking a fifth. And that was that was my modality for coping. And it was a terrible one, but that's what it was.
Yeah. Um, and then so the situation that you hit in court, um, and you had referred to that as like going against the system. So this is kind of a different thing. So that your addiction was one thing and what you were battling was something different.
Oh, yeah. So the reason why I bring addiction into this is because I was on the tail end of my addiction, beginning my sobriety. So I was what 2 or 3 months into my sobriety. But the thing about it is, I still attracted the old me because I never worked through my sobriety. I was never in a stable position, and so I was very vulnerable at the time, very insecure about being alone or isolated or whatever. So I'm like, I just attracted the first thing that came. And the thing with cluster B personalities, to dive into this a little bit, you have four different types. You have an antisocial, a narcissist, a borderline, and a histrionic. So usually with like soft operators or alpha males in general, is we attract, or let me rephrase that, we are the magnet is typically a borderline with this type of individual that it's just magnets attract because they see a person that can be their savior, can help them through whatever. We see a broken person, and then it becomes like a well, it's kind of like a trauma bond of sorts, and then from there, but it's the one of the most toxic relationships that a person or a couple could be in. And and so that was my phase two of like, here comes the next series of drama in my life. And that's and all that to say though, like she weaponized the legal system but I still pray for her. I pray that she will come to um, that she will come to know God, come to know Christ, and her heart will be softened, and because the thing is she's broken. She's a hurt individual, just like all of us, and so we all need healing. We all need that. We need something bigger to help us get through whatever um, problem set that we have in life. And so, all right, I think I answered the question.
Yeah, I think this is really important because first off, if there is for the tip of the spear warriors, if there's a 95% divorce rate, there is something going on there, right? There's something you're not being set up for success in your marriages somehow. And then Leslie Wyrick was just on, and and I've seen this on my end too, hearing stories of attempts of suicide. It seems like it's a perfect storm, and then the last straw is the relationship ending. And so I am picturing, I'm glad you're here, but I'm picturing that this is, everybody has their own individual story, but there's something very familiar happening in your story. And I think that's why it's really it's an important story, as they all are, actually. They're all important stories. They're different angles of issues. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing and talking through that because I think it will help many people that are at that point of, I don't know what to do. I'm it looks like I'm going to be losing this relationship. What happened? What is this childhood trauma that has come up and the addiction? So I appreciate you sharing. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording so that we can have an open conversation. But again, Mike, thanks so much for sharing. I
Thank
appreciate
you, Sarah, for the opportunity.